Chapter 7. 1. Red Lotus, Maria. Rain, gloominess, and silence were the three main components of this specific night as Exthiand walked the desolate streets. Lifeless they seemed, as not many preferred the embrace of the cold. Fierce shower that ruled over the downtown locale. The reason behind the man's late-night adventure was hardly apparent, however. This, of course, shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone familiar with the Artifinoid's personality. Like a lost child, he aimlessly wandered the shady roads, up until a certain light provided guidance to the creation as it captured his attention. This illumination was one emanating from a diner located in one of the worst and most dangerous districts of the city, but of course, the danger and the risk both meant very little to someone like Exthiand as he carried on inside the construction. The construction itself was quite sizable, having been crafted out of stainless steel as it shined brightly, reflecting the moonlight, street lamps, and other sources of illumination off its own walls. 3 vivid and powerful neon lights rounded the entirety of the building as they disgorged the piercing scarlet radiance onto the streets, while the towering sign of Diner Done Right dominated the night sky. Upon entering and scanning the locale, very few patrons were found on the inside, almost none in fact. Much like before, this also meant hardly anything to the Rome d'Astrée Artifinoid as he locked his sight on a table and without hesitation proceeded to occupy it. Briefly after Exthiand became acquainted with the selected booth, the 2 waitresses, and the only 2 waitresses working this late-night shift, seemingly spotted the new client. And just such observation provided the foundation needed for a conversation. "We got one more, Maria," said one of the servers in a perky voice. "He is kind of cute as well. Maybe you should take this one." The waitress continued to speak with her tone wrapped in a blanket of enthusiasm. "He looks very serious, Erin," Maria answered after some time spent scanning the newest patron carefully. "Well, that's a good thing, right?" Erin quickly asked as both women now found themselves prudently examining the newest customer. "A serious man is much better than some joker. You go on and serve him. Who knows? Maybe this is the right one for you." Erin was quite felicitous with her statement as the 2 waitresses were more than just co-workers and were in fact close friends. Erin, being the aforementioned loyal companion, was more than just determined to help her girlfriend to find the right man, as Maria had struggled with this venture greatly in the past. "What if he isn't single?" Maria asked with a serving of uncertainty in her voice. "Just stop being scared and approach him already." Erin's tone of encouragement was much heavier than the plate that she was holding as the 2 conversed. "I got the other table covered. It's all on you now, girl. Now go before I do it for you." The woman ceased with a slight chuckle following her remark. Shortly after this exchange, Erin did as promised and went on to accommodate the other clients inside the restaurant. Maria was left standing still, expressing genuine interest in this mysterious and serious man, while also realizing that she could wait no longer to provide service to him. Maria finally approached the table at which XVI I was located. About time there. I was beginning to think this was a self-service diner. The Artifinoid spoke with jest while still remaining completely patient. "I am sorry, sir. We were just kind of busy, that's all," Maria answered with uncertainty pouring through yet again. Exthiand took some time to look around the diner, inside of which only one more table was occupied, and then proceeded to respond to the unresolved waitress. "Really now? 2 tables is considered busy for this diner?" The artificial being once more spoke while filled with bon mot. Maria followed suit and scanned the diner herself, but then quickly directed her vision and attention back to her client to resume this rather unusual conversation. "First, I misspoke. Do you know what you want to order, or do you need more time to decide?" The lady swiftly steered the conversation away from planes of discomfiture. "Well, see you on the menu," spoke invitingly, yet a dark overtone coated his words. "That's unfortunate now, isn't it?" A smile accompanied the Artiphenoid's comment on this occasion. Maria was caught off guard, however. That state didn't last long, as the waitress briskly reciprocated with a smile of her own, shortly after which she continued the exchange. "I guess I could talk to my boss, and maybe we can add that to the menu." The woman was now speaking with much more confidence than prior, having gained a better understanding of the man whom she was serving. "Wouldn't that be something?" XP spoke in a voice lower than his usual bass, while still remaining flirtatious. "For the time being, though, I will just get coffee. 3 of them," he concluded in a more professional tone. 3 cups? An instant inquisitive response this was out of the young waitress. 3 pots. The Artiphenoid matched the response time of the waitress, perhaps even beating it. After a brief expression of disbelief, Maria proceeded to fulfill the intrepid request. A short interval elapsed, and the flabbergasted waitress had made her return with 3 full pots of coffee as adjured by X II, with heavy scepticism on her serving plate alongside the caffeine suffused. "Hot fluid. There it is, all 3 pots," the woman said, placing down the dark, stimulating liquid with great care, with her eyes fixated on the steaming metallic containers. "Are you really going to drink it all?" Maria inquired genuinely shortly after, as her gaze shifted onto the artificial creation while she pressed the serving metal pan against her body. Having crossed her arms, "Why don't you have a seat with me so that you can watch me do it?" X said enticingly, with a grin of mystery slowly forming on his face. "First."
Maria hesitated to produce a rapid response to the unanticipated request.
The creation, on the other hand, found no hesitancy present. J. The playful Artiphenoid responded with swiftness and charm. "It is the letter following I after all now, isn't it?" he added with the same grin still present from before. A sincere smile of mirth inhabited Maria's face, after the assembly of which the gleeful server responded. "I can't. I am on shift. I would get in a lot of trouble if I did that." Sincerity and slight concern once again dominated Maria's comment. "Well, maybe you should let me talk to your boss then. I am sure I can change his mind." Ernst now spoke, having left the spice of jest behind as seriousness garnished his remark. Luckily for the manager of this particular restaurant, he wasn't quite in attendance, if you will, as the Artiphenoid's methods of convincing others were rather unconventional, to put it lightly. Regardless, this effort of persuasion was hardly necessary, as Erin injected herself amidst this conversation, and with it brought along some rather elating news. "You can clock off now, Maria," Erin stated in a professional tone. "I talked to the head cook, and he said you can go. It is slow enough, so I can cover the rest of your shift." Remain professional while relaying the message on to her friend. Without even waiting for Maria's response, the waitress started to walk away from the booth, whilst making one last remark in a soft tone, surely designed for only her girlfriend to hear. "You can thank me later," she said, having nearly left the vicinity of the booth entirely. "Looks like you are out of excuses now, aren't you?" Ixthad articulated after escorting Maria's friend with his eyes, placing the first pot of coffee down on the table. "Finishing it in its totality. I guess so, huh?" The waitress responded with a heartwarming tone and a smile of her own as she positioned herself inside the comfortable and secluded stall right across the creation. Once this did occur, a vibrant conversation ensued briefly.
After,
Many topics were brought about, one of which regarded the ethnic background of the two young adults. Maria Reyes had noticed early on that I possessed a certain look, resembling a Spaniard, and this was of course entirely true, as the Artifinoid's genetic mother was none other than Valeria Martins. I inquired into Maria's ethnic background as well, and her country of origin even, and it was revealed to be Colombia. This was the foundation for quite the conversation, which in turn aided in solidifying a newly formed bond between the two. This was most assuredly surprising, yet not entirely unexpected. An hour later, and the duo was finally finished with the dull scenery of the diner and progressed to make their exit. Hexthesand, having not anticipated such an expected meeting in such a mundane location, did not bring a car along with him. Once the pair escaped the confines of the diner, the absence of an automobile served as a starting point to yet another exchange. "It's still raining down hard, but I don't have a car, Miccolo," Maria said in a neutral tone, glancing over at her newly made acquaintance. The Artifinoid had, of course, given Maria his human name as Ixthes would be needlessly difficult to explain. Maria and Miccolo, Madame, it was indeed. "Do you have one?" Reyes continued. Ixthi's response was not one of grand rapidity, as he carefully took the time to survey the area. After this was done, the Artifinoid had finally produced an answer. "I do now," he said, and then proceeded to make his way towards a certain car parked in a rather secluded lot. Maria was unsure once again, but chose not to refute, and just simply followed Miccolo's lead. Once the duo approached the car, I broke the window glass effortlessly and unlocked the door from within the vehicle for the irresolute waitress. Confident and barefaced, Miccolo started to hotwire the newly acquired car. The time spent with his brother XXV had paid off seemingly, as the oldest sibling had demonstrated how to perform the prior-mentioned procedure of questionable morality to Ixthiol previously. Maria, surprisingly to some, offered very little confutation to the fairly illegal act that had transpired in front of her. "I guess that shirt wasn't lying, then?"
Miccolo spoke while fidgeting with the wires.
The man was in fact referencing a shirt Maria had changed into after her shift was done. This piece of fabric had a message encapsulating both sides, the front and the back. On the front of the shirt it read, "I am a Bundy fan," with a picture of Al Bundy from a certain sitcom, whilst on the back another message was engraved. It read, "No, not that one." This time, however, the Al Bundy picture was crossed out, while Ted Bundy's picture occupied the lower half of the shirt. "I figured if you were okay with murder, you would be fine with a little Grand Theft Auto," the Artifinoid stated, having now concluded the hot wiring process. "I made it myself. I thought it was clever." Maria was now speaking with great pride exhuming from her voice. "I don't know if it actually is, though." The pride was suddenly no longer, as a layer of uncertainty had swiftly replaced it. "I don't know why, but I always had a fascination with serial killers." She continued on with her apprehensive articulation. "Do you think I am weird for that?" Miss Reyes's inquiry was layered with genuine interest and a considerable amount of distress as it left the young lady's mouth. Ixthes smirked at the uncertain one and then proceeded to assertively respond. "I think you are lucky." The two had spent a considerable amount of time inside the automobile, with intermittent conversations sprouting arbitrarily whilst in motion. Yet the moments of silence that did occur were hardly unnatural, as many of times Maria and Miccolo exchanged smiles within those intervals. A match made in heaven, perhaps? And after just such a moment of quietude, a conversation once again took place. You said I was lucky earlier. Are you a killer yourself? Maria's inquest was one of pure intrigue, with no fear to be observed. I'm afraid I don't do spoilers, Miss Reyes. The Artifinoid responded firmly while fixated on the road. Well, if you do kill me, could you do it quickly? Maria's tone was now coated by playfulness, with fear still very much absent. I chose not to respond, opting to chuckle ever so slightly instead. The coltish waitress had formed a grin herself while looking at Mikolo for a brief time before redirecting her gaze to the outside once more. After another short moment of silence, however, Maria spoke again. "Could we stop by my place really quick?" she inquired gently, with quickness and intrigue. "Sure." An instantaneous response, this was from Mikolo, which had left the woman in a state of fair perplexity. "You aren't even going to ask what for?" Reyes asked with a genuine expression of confusion. Mikolo once again elected for the exhibit of quietness, only this time he turned to face Maria directly before grinning at her as the metal carriage remained in transit. This transit, however, would come to an end as the duo had made their arrival to the location previously requested by Reyes. This site was a small apartment complex with only 4 units in total, having 2 flats on the first floor and 2 on the second. The complex itself was dark green in colour and had been crafted nearly fully out of wood. However, the hue of the building was something that was rather difficult to distinguish, as the complex looked very much forgotten and aged quite poorly. Perhaps this was not too surprising, considering the destitute and dangerous neighbourhood it was located in. Maria had gotten out of the car, whilst Mikolo stayed behind under the promise of this whole procedure being momentary. This was not to be, however, as when Maria did finally enter her flat, she was blindsided by 2 unexpected guests, who had made their entry prior, and had been waiting patiently for the owner to return. These 2 were henchmen sent by the cartel, and they were there to collect, so to say. You see, Maria had been smuggled into the country illegally quite some time ago, and a deal was arranged in which she would pay the money back to the criminal syndicate slowly whilst working inside the U. This arrangement had suddenly become quite unsatisfactory to the organisation, so they had sent the 2 collectors to kidnap Reyes in order to expedite the payback process. Maria was destined by the cartel to be sold into sex slavery, and she was very much aware of this once the attack occurred. The young and brave Reyes was not willing to go down without a fight, however, and a fight a little one gave them inside that tiny flat. From the living room to the bedroom, the struggle advanced, during which Maria managed to even slice one of the intruders open with their own knife. While the plucky woman fought valiantly, her resistance would come to a rather abrupt end, as one of the men hit her over the head with quite the debilitating force, knocking her down entirely. Maria, while still conscious, had unfortunately been rendered defenceless. The 2 assailants took some liberty as far as their plan was concerned. Initially, the intent was to kidnap and bring her over to the cartel. However, they decided to collect early, if you will. The 2 men started to get ready to rape the unlucky young woman. Mikolo's patience was hardly his strongest suit, as the Artifinoid found himself quickly becoming increasingly more and more frustrated whilst waiting inside the car. Suddenly the man could take no more. XVII, while visibly agitated, egressed the vehicle and proceeded inside the flat. With the door left open in front of him and slight sounds of commotion coming from deep within the apartment, Mikolo did not require much time to figure out exactly what was happening. The Artifinoid advanced through the flat surreptitiously, conquering every room before finally reaching the location of the rather unnerving spectacle. "You boys are having a good time and didn't even invite me?" Exthek spoke in a deep and commanding tone with the cherry of sarcasm on top. "Maybe I want to join," he added, smirking. The two henchmen most certainly did not expect another presence in the flat. However, the most unexpected quickly transformed into the most undesired, as one of the men started to yell once completely turned around and had now faced the unforeseen newcomer. "El Diablo Blanco! El Diablo Blanco!" the henchman shouted, rushing around the room petrified. The Artifinoid's reputation preceded him indeed, as the statement that the panicking outlaw proclaimed was entirely true. The two goons now found themselves in a small room with the White Devil himself standing right in front of their eyes. While one of the attackers was paralyzed by fear, the other one was able to keep his composure well enough, despite the great amount of concern that was written across his face. Albeit he was collected, he was also foolish. The brazen goon rushed the devil with a knife in an effort to overpower him, but this proved to be a fruitless endeavor. Micholo disarmed the man effortlessly in more ways than one, in fact. I dodged the knife while grabbing the attacker's arm with his right hand, snapping it at the elbow inwards shortly after, while utilizing the palm of his left hand, having required as much force as one would in order to break a pencil. The henchman dropped to the floor immediately, writhing in immense agony while screaming at the top of his lungs, with the bone exposed and visible from underneath the skin. The excruciating shrieking did not last long, however, as Micholo swiftly finished the job. The Artifinoid knelt down on one knee and severed the man's cervical bone, putting him out of his misery at last. With the room having once again become a chalice filled with intoxicating serenity, the other goon had promptly found himself disposed in the corner, shuddering, and possessing not the ability to avert his gaze from the artificial creation. "Cartel, right?" Micholo said in a calm tone as he began nearing the cornered man. Wholly consumed by fear, the goon didn't vocalize, and simply nodded his head instead. "How much does she owe them?" The Artifinoid continued the inquisition while retaining his composure. "First, I don't—" Before the henchman was able to finish his angst-filled response, Micholo had interrupted. "Nothing. She owes them nothing. You understand?" Micholo bullishly stated, towering over the fear-governed male who elected to remain silent, having instead produced a nod of comprehension yet again. "And if your boss has a problem with this new arrangement, let him know that the devil will be visiting him." Axayan expressed one's own in ways quite self-regarding, yet he was hardly done. "Now go and deliver the news," Micholo added, moving away from the hired gun and with it, clearing the path to the entrance which had been previously obstructed by the Artifinoid. The henchman took no time and had bolted out of the room at the speed of sound seemingly, while the domineering expression of fear still placarded the man's face. Having now the cosy chamber to themselves, Micholo turned his head slowly towards Reyes and started to approach the young lady at a deliberate pace. Maria, clearly shocked by what had just recently occurred in front of her eyes, quickly scooted back towards the corner herself until her back was completely against the wall, and much like the henchman prior, she too could not take her eyes off the one they called the devil. Debilitating fear and trenchant concern dominated Reyes as the man had now fully neared the woman, occupying reaching distance. Micholo then proceeded to squat down, bringing himself to Maria's eye level while reaching for her face. However, the still frightened lass opted to turn away in fear, whimpering ever so slightly. Nevertheless, this was exactly what the Artifinoid desired, as his intent was not to hurt the maimed lady, but rather to inspect the damage done to her by the goons. After just such inspection, Miccolo once again began speaking. "Looks like they hit you pretty hard. You will need some medical attention," the man said while rigorously scanning the side of her face. "You are still bleeding. Come with, and I will patch you up," Miccolo stated in a deep and soothing tone, beginning to rise back up to the upright position. Maria looked at the man with her eyes bulging, requiring time to recollect herself before producing a response. "Are you really him? The one they call the White Devil?" she finally asked, having regained the necessary composure while her voice periodically faltered throughout the inquisition. "No, I just play him on the TV," Miccolo answered the implicative inquiry, chuckling to himself shortly after with blatant sarcasm present. "Now, come on, this little room here isn't exactly my style." Miccolo had now returned to speaking in full jest once more as he began to motion out of the presently occupied location. Maria obliged the Artifinoid's instruction and swiftly rose back to her feet, following him out of the room entirely. While the pair was on their way back to the vehicle, XVI, I had noticed the uneasy state which Reyes was still a captive of, and had initiated an exchange in an effort to bring the much-needed dose of relief. "If you run, I won't chase you," he stated with words of reassurance while opening the car door. Without waiting for the woman's response, Miccolo entered the car and remained sitting in the driver's seat, patiently biding his time inside yet again. The forces of deep contemplation had devoured the lady in full as she stood stationary nearest the car door with her hands rubbing against her triceps. After a considerable amount of time had passed, the car door could be heard opening. Maria Reyes had finally entered the vehicle, having formed her ultimate decision, and while the young woman resided in complete quietude, Ixtions had taken up the mantle himself as he began to speak. "Buckle up, Miss Reyes. It's quite the long drive ahead of us." Chapter 7, 2. Red Lotus, Maria Reyes, road signs, street lamps, advertising billboards, and many palm trees were just some of the elements the pair had passed as they made their lengthy journey back to the Greylove mansion. Speed was in the Artifinoid's blood. Indeed, however, it inhabited the essence of the creation not only in the form of methamphetamine, which Exayand had introduced into his system upon beginning their protracted trip, but also in the form of the momentum generated by the volant automobile as Miccolo blazed along the pavement, heading towards the desired destination. The little beauty had stayed submerged under the waves of stillness throughout the majority of the couple's travels, yet this would undoubtedly change as the waitress would once again surface to shatter the silence. "Thanks, Miccolo. I should have said that before."
Maria spoke while garnering more confidence than prior, despite still being affected by what had occurred earlier inside the tiny flat.
"You afraid?" Miccolo asked the waitress, ignoring the previous remark altogether. "Should I be? I figured if you wanted to hurt me, you would have done it already." The woman answered earnestly, quickly glancing at the man responsible for many acts of rattling savagery before returning her gaze onto the outside. "Not only that, but why even save me if your intent was to harm me all along? I am not afraid to answer your question." Maria now spoke overfilled with conviction as her response produced a smirk on the face of the artificial creation. "Clever girl," Miccolo responded concisely and genuinely, with his eyes still glued to the road. Maria was not lying when she said that she did not fear the man sitting adjacent to her. The man who was responsible for immolating, flaying, and dismembering his victims, if you of course subscribe to believe the street tales bared about him, and Maria very much did believe them. Nevertheless, despite all of this, she could not help but to feel a sense of comfort and safety whilst in the presence of the one they called the Devil, The woman's past was rather lamentable and thronged with sorrow, as she did not have much in terms of a family, with death often taking a claim of the ones she cared about the most. Reyes had also been sexually abused before, at a much younger age, by the men of the cartel who smuggled her into the country to begin with. Unfortunately, this woeful act had occurred on multiple occasions and had left quite the emotional lesion on the youthful lady's soul as a result. While under the devil's wing, for the first time in a long time, Maria Gabriela Reyes felt safe within the confines of the United States. With the oppressive boot of the cartel finally lifted from the young woman's proverbial throat, this relief, of course, came from the unlikeliest of sources. Miss Reyes seemingly traded one devil for another. The two finished their lengthy trip and had arrived at the destination. "Wow! You live here by yourself? This place is huge and beautiful," Maria exclaimed upon witnessing the magnificence of the construct displayed in front of her. "I live here with my family," Micolo responded while looking over at Maria, observing the trance she had succumbed to. "Though you won't see any of them around tonight, they are all out." The Artifinoid continued, and in fact was quite truthful in his statement, as the rest of his siblings, alongside Dr. Gray, had all gone out on family-related business. "Do you have any pets?" Maria inquired with interest and anticipation as the duo began to near the main entrance of the breathtaking palace. "I have 2 dogs, yeah," he fired out the response, seemingly anticipant of it. "But they don't do so well with new faces, so I will introduce you to them later," Micolo concluded, though on this particular occasion less truth occupied his words as he referenced his exotic pets. As the duo made it inside this marvel of a house, Reyes's state of astonishment only escalated, as she scrutinized every nook and cranny of the mansion, much like a kid in a candy store, turning her head in all directions rapidly. The lady, having once again made a complete stop, had never experienced such a locale before, and this did not go unnoticed by her new acquaintance. Xars smiled at the enchanted one while scanning her before proceeding to vocalize himself. "It's this way. Follow me," Micolo uttered, the act of which had broken the spell Reyes fell under at last, as she began following the man shortly after the request was expressed. The two had made it up the stairs to the 2nd floor of the mansion, having then progressed to enter a room located towards the back end of the house. Within this room, inside the bathroom, was found a medical supplies cabinet, which was, in fact, exactly what the Artifinoid was seeking all along. Maria followed him inside the room while still presiding in the state of awe, as she continued to spin her head in all directions, surveying the entirety of the house. "Take a seat on the bed there. I'll grab the medical kit," Micolo stated, sounding much like a teacher in this instance. Without saying anything, Maria once again followed the creation's instructions and positioned herself on the bed. "I am not as good as my older brother at this medical aid shit, so you will have to be patient with me." This statement was entirely true as well, of course, since Micolo had never required any medical assistance due to his abnormal healing ability. Still, though, I have seen him do it a couple of times before, so we should be all right, he concluded, positioning himself on the bed near the comely and still astounded woman. "Is your brother a doctor?" Reyes asked instantly, with intrigue overwhelming her. "Among many other things, yeah," Micolo answered with quickness himself, having officially begun the process of treating the open wound as the room became one filled with the music of silence. This effort did take some time, since the Artifinoid greatly lacked experience. However, in the end, success was in fact achieved, as the bleeding was no longer brand as new. "That's what they say, right?" The Artifinoid spoke, while putting the medical supplies back inside the kit slowly. "Who are they? The ones that say that?" Maria responded jovially, scanning the medic with a gander of heavy warmth. Not sure. I've been trying to figure it out myself over here. Launched an official investigation and all. Xaythe continued the playful exchange, having finished placing the supplies back inside the case while injecting a dosage of humour into the winsome little lady. Reyes sincerely laughed at this remark before quickly following up with yet another inquiry. "You know what they say about you on the streets?" The woman was now speaking with not only a soft tone, but a rather inviting one as well. In fact, the young one was becoming increasingly more and more flirtatious. Moment to ruminate over the recently asked. "I don't know, but I am sure it's nothing but flattery." Selecting a path constructed from the bricks of sarcasm the Artifinoid most certainly had, as he returned onto the lady his own gaze of fondness. "Well, it's a mix of things, really," the woman said, rubbing her left elbow and glancing quickly at the floor. "But I will say that they did forget to say how handsome you are." Fully coquettish, the young Maria Reyes had now become, having shifted her eyes back onto her saviour. "At least they aren't liars, then." While Mikolow's response might surprise some, the reality was that despite his overwhelming ego, the Artifinoid had always considered himself quite the eyesore, the ugly duckling of the family, so to speak. Having said that, Xaythe was hardly one foolish, and was in fact fully aware of the advances made by Reyes, so he played along. Mikolo, having already occupied the spacious bed with the lady, had manoeuvred himself closer briefly after finishing his sentiment. "But they are liars after all," the little Reyes added, leaning in to kiss the artificial creation moments after. Mikolo reciprocated, and this development served as the prurient foundation for the two as they began their physical and passionate capade. The bed, which was quite well made prior to the initiative, had become one resembling quite the display of disarray as the sheets. Pillows and covers had all been abruptly displaced, while the pair vehemently shifted their bodies within its confines. After a short interval of time spent rolling around and undressing, Mikolo had suddenly stood back up, and while towering over Reyes, the Artifinoid uttered, "Well then, if this is how it's going to go down, I must warn you," the man expressed in a frisky and resonant voice, smirking immediately after. "You might not be able to walk for a while after I am done with you." Not words one would want to hear coming out of the Artifinoid's mouth typically, but just in such a context. I possess the ability of near-infinite stamina. One does not need to elaborate any further than this to understand the implications. Mikolo closed the sturdy door leading to the chamber of affection and progressed to perform the procedure. A slight knock on the door was heard, yet no response was provided on the following morning. Despite this, however, the behemoth that was V entered the room while being as silent as someone of his size could possibly ever hope to be. The tender Artifinoid was hardly empty-handed, though, as on his possession was found a plate on the surface of which were present fresh scrambled eggs, bacon, ham and sausage links. Xaythe was serving breakfast to the unexpected guest of the house, a gesture quite common in fact, and one very fitting as it related to the personality of the giant who had nearly made it to the side of the bed without alarming the newcomer. Nearly, of course, being the word direly requiring the emphasis, as the tiny belle began to detach herself from the puissant web of irresistible slumber once the artificial creation was mere meters away. "I am sorry, I tried to be silent, but look at my size over here," Xaythe stated, alluding to his enormous stature briefly after realizing the fresh arrival's awakening. "I don't mean my size like sexually, though. I mean I am of a decent size there as well. I am sorry for that. The big man suddenly burst out, looking down on the ground as he carried the weight of ignominy. Absolutely none of that came out the way it was supposed to. Can we redo this, actually, if you don't mind? My name is Lucas. What is your name? The Artiphenoid requested of Reyes, having been overrun by embarrassment caused by the babble that had just recently exited his mouth. Maria, however, was very much forgiving, and even reciprocal, forming a smile of charity across her face immediately after hearing the most recent remarks made by the awkward creation. "My name is Maria. It's nice to meet you, Lucas," she answered in a heartwarming tone, providing V with the much-required relief. Lucas smiled back at the lady himself, but then quickly slid the plate he had brought with him towards the visitor. "I brought you some breakfast. I hope you like it," the giant said while mimicking the tender tone of Maria from earlier, forming a welcoming grin to accompany his sentiment. "Wow! Thanks a lot, Lucas. I did not expect that at all." Maria wasn't lying as genuine and pleasant shock resonated within her words. "It looks delicious," she appended, excitedly examining the alluring assortment of the breakfast helpings. "It sure is. You know, not to brag or anything, but I am like the head cook of the household, and I am damn good at it." The Artiphenoid had consumed a great serving of pride himself as he relayed his vaunting remark onto the tiny woman. "This is the third plate I brought up, in fact," Lucas added in a thrilled and almost childlike tone. "I ate the other two I brought up before, though, since you were asleep for much longer than I had expected," he swiftly stated, shifting his eyes from the guest momentarily. "But that's okay, I always make a lot of food. Enough to feed multiple villages, really, but then I usually eat it all in one sitting anyway," he resumed with his torrent of rapid declarations. "I'm talking too much over here, aren't I?" Vi finally concluded the barrage with the flavouring of jest and a kind-hearted smile to escort it along. Maria was once again very receptive of this display and had genuinely laughed at the Artiphenoid's line of unconventional and cumbrous humour. She opted, however, to focus on a certain statement made by Lucas moments prior and proceeded to follow up on it. "You said I slept longer than you thought. What time is it now exactly?" Maria asked while getting ready to leave the bed. "It's 6 p.m. Exactly, Maria," Vi answered instantly. "Holy!" the woman exclaimed, looking at the clock she had just recently noticed. "That means I slept for like 15 hours. What the hell?" In addition to the flavoursome breakfast, a grand partition of confusion had entered the young lady's system. "You must have had a good time last night then, huh?" Lucas asked, once again sounding like a young child, amicably exhorting the new arrival. "Leave the girl alone." Sixth, a commanding voice had promptly invaded the room as it was heard reverberating from beyond the door. The one responsible for this disruption was none other than Nyx, and once the female Artiphenoid entered the room fully, she resumed her articulation. "Is he bothering?" "You, sweetie?" Alexandra's voice softened dramatically as she directed her inquiry towards the addled Reyes. "No, not at all," Maria answered quickly and honestly. "Well, you brought the girl food, yet you are not letting her eat it." Redirecting her vision towards her brother yet again, the artificial acrobat spoke, closely resembling a mother in tone. "Anyway, the shower here is fully operational. It's just inside this room here." The matriarch gestured towards the bathroom door within the bedroom. "I also brought you some clean clothes. You and I are about the same size, so it should fit perfectly." She finished with an avid grin covering her face. "Thanks a lot. You guys really didn't have to do this," Maria said in a deeply appreciative voice. "What kind of hosts would we be then?" Lucas responded while glancing at his sister momentarily, having then suddenly shifted his sight towards Maria's dress, which was left inhabiting the floor. "That's a pretty red dress. Looks like a flower on it or something, right?" The massive artiphenoid earnestly inquired, emanating with curiosity. "Yes, it's a lotus, I think," Maria answered, requiring an interval of time to contemplate, as the lady had never quite considered the particularity of the design encapsulating her garment. "A red lotus, huh?" Vi rhetorically stated, having full intention on progressing on with his remark, yet falling victim to his sister's intervention shortly after. "Lucas, aren't you forgetting something?" the sister asked her brother with sternness, leading him acutely. "What?" In the firm clasp of oblivion, the brother found himself as he inquired of his sibling, "Did I forget to feed Mikolo's dogs again?" Vi continued to speak with uncertainty engulfing his words. "No,"
Ix answered with forbearance, beginning to evacuate her temper.
"The whole letting the girl eat, shower, and get dressed thing we discussed like 3 seconds earlier," she added with an expression of grave demand, yet with complete absence of scorn. "Oh yes, that's my bad." Lucas had finally escaped the clutches of eagerness as it related to the newcomer. "We will let you get ready now," he concluded, having begun the process of leaving the bedchamber. "Wait, before you go," Reyes quickly burst out, almost shouting even. "Is Mikolo around?" she asked the siblings with a heavy measure of interest. "Hold on." The brother stopped his movement abruptly, succumbing to curtailment established on astonishment. "You came here with Mikolo?" Vi inquired, attempting to elucidate and to find guidance out of the cavern of crushing muddle. "Of course she did," the sister decidedly responded, providing the guidance sought by her mountainous sibling. "Who else did you think she came with?" Ix added, introducing a slight hint of mockery, yet leaving any spite behind. "Anders," Vi answered instantaneously, with his eyes locked on his striking little sister. "Yeah, all right." Ix matched the response time of her brother, while sounding entirely dismissive. "Are you saying XXV doesn't have game?" the big artiphenoid asked with a smile on his face, injecting glee into the exchange. "I am saying you need to leave this girl so that she could eat." Ix addressed her brother in quite the firm tone, yet one that was still remained wrapped in playfulness. "All right, Mom," Lucas stated genially, with his eyes no longer obeying the female artiphanoid and instead fixating on the visitor once again, who, incidentally, had been enjoying the interchange displayed in front of her, as was apparent by the woman's facial expression. "Anyway, to answer your question, sweetie, Ix progressed to follow VI's suit and had now also become focused on the new arrival. He is here. You will see him later on after you are done up here, don't you worry." Mother Alex concluded, and with her response, both of the artificial siblings began to egress the room as was initially promised. On this new day, the house was once again filled with the usual inhabitants. Dr. Gray could be found in the garage, his seemingly favourite location due to the fact it was utilised as a lab of sorts in this particular construction. The duo of VI and IX had made their way to the gym right after leaving Reyes's room, whilst Exion and XXV were to be found inside the living room, discussing matters pertaining to the artificial creation program. This vast room would effectively serve as the main base of operations for so much of the planning which the two older brothers had so regularly been ingrained in. As a result of just that fact, both of the artiphenoids could frequently be found within this locale. I have concluded we could utilize dimethylheptylpyran to aid us while infiltrating the facility. DMHP and its oacetate ester were investigated by the military in the 50s and had proven to be quite effective. XXV explained while in constant motion inside the room, using the isotope of 3,12-dimethylheptyl, minus 78,910 tetrahydrominous, 669 trimethyl 6-hours dibenzo. Dipura-1OL will provide us with the non-lethal, incapacitating agent we need to carry this operation out. This, of course, is the 6th variation of the compound on the isomerism chart. The oldest sibling concluded his elaboration as he neared the desk at which his younger brother was located. Was I meant to understand all of that? The cheeky Xekther stated with his attention reserved entirely for his brother as he carefully observed him maneuver around the room. Because I'm going to need at least half of that translated, he continued, placing his feet up on the table and clasping his hands together. Actually, I am going to need all of that translated. The Artiphenoid spoke with jest entirely absent. I didn't understand any of that shit. Shesiand ended his remark with his vision still bound to his brother. Have you not read the files I've sent you, XDA? XXV had returned the favour of gaze as he asked the man behind the desk. It is quite the extensive document that goes into great detail about the chemical composition and application of this particular compound. Anders added, having started to pace around the spacious location yet again. And now you know why I didn't read it. The foolhardy Artiphenoid answered while starting an effort to locate and remove a cigarette from within one of the desk drawers. We mustn't be unprepared, Exdive. It is a matter of extreme vitality that we get familiar with the tools we use, as I am afraid there isn't any room for error here. XXV's words carried the bearing of a college instructor as he addressed his brother. Yeah, don't worry about it. Mikolo quickly responded, having found what he was looking for. I will get IX to read that bullshit later so that she can give me the Cliff Notes version of the shit. The Artiphenoid remarked with a fully lit cigarette, taking his very first inhale while talking to the other occupant of the office locale. Fair enough. XXV stopped his movement as he looked up to the ceiling. Now, brother, about that girl. Anders constructed an opening statement to a much deeper conversation, most assuredly. You quoting a song title or something? Mikolo stated, precluding the discourse from developing at that very moment, however. One would be foolish to think that the Artiphenoid was attempting to derail the conversation, as this was most surely not the case. XVII, after all, was rather scatterbrained at times. Not quite, brother. XXV broke the observance of the plafond and had once again begun pacing while looking at his sibling. The woman you brought here last night, Maria Gabriela Reyes? Mikolo interrupted before Anders had a chance to finish yet another attempt. You know her middle name? He inquired, genuinely surprised. Of course you know her middle name. You know everything. Mikolo answered his own inquiry, sounding greatly disappointed with himself. Even I don't know her middle name, he added, revealing the reason behind the newly formed state of distress. Yes, I was able to find out much more than just that. XVII. XXV opted to respond to the previously posed question regardless, having now occupied a space in near proximity of his brother's desk. Should I be concerned about a sudden increase in the risk of humanization? The creation's voice permeated with concern as he intently stared at the man behind the table. This was most certainly not the most typical expression for someone like Anders Greylove. Do I look like V to you, XXV? XZ said dismissively, glancing up at his older sibling. Not at all, XII. You and VI share a different genetic foundation with different individuals serving as bases for... Mikolo once again interrupted his professorial brother before he could finish his elaborate explanation. I was joking, XXV. The Artiphenoid said with disappointment, quickly becoming the third presence inside the office locale. You can pick up topology in an instant, but you can't understand humour? Exed found himself unwilling to let his older brother's faux pas go as he resumed mocking the genius creation. "My apologies, brother. It's something I will have to work on in the future." Anders Greylove was sincere in his concession, yet unaffected by his younger sibling's efforts of light-hearted derision. "However, you never answered the question, Saif. Do you feel anything for this woman?" The Artifinoid was back to his usual tone, with his eyes no longer situated on the one whom he was communicating with. Mikolo required a moment to himself before providing an answer, with his vision scanning the pacing effort. "First, I don't know, XXX." Exdayan responded earnestly, yet an overtone of defeat could be observed within his voice. The Artifinoid might have just become a patient administered inside the so often destabilizing and treacherous clinic of swarming affection. "Do you plan on sharing our creation with her, alongside what we are?" Relentless XXA was with his inquisition, while absorbed by the blaze of concern for his younger brother, with his tone completely devoid of any inklings of deprecation. "I haven't decided yet," XXC Sakai answered, while breaking his gaze away from his sibling, with the chair now turned towards the wall, trounced in full by the rigid inquiries. "Do you not trust me, brother?" Mikolo appended, his voice overloaded with anticipation. Anders found himself requiring a moment before producing a response. "I trust you fully, Exdand," Anders stated, injecting reassurance as he scanned the back end of his brother's chair. As always, reinforcing the sentiment of trust, XXV did decide to halt the line of inquiry for the time being, however. He opted to continue speaking on the matter of Maria, regardless. "She is looking for you now, X." The older Greylove expressed shortly after beginning to prep his things, as he was now getting ready for his impending departure. "How do you know?" Extheon asked, while stupefied with his chair, now once again facing towards his brilliant sibling. "I can hear her walking around and saying your name." The bald one answered instantly, while still fully consumed by the process of preparation. "She sounds rather uncomfortable. Surely it's due to the fact she is unfamiliar with the layout of the house." XXV concluded the sentiment, having now faced Expoand as he found himself fully ready to leave the premises of the mansion. "Despite she is getting closer now." Sure enough, near moments later, Maria's voice was now audible to both brothers, and not exclusively to the sagacious one. "How come Grey could not give me super hearing? Even humans hear better than me, for fuck's sake." Stern muttered while presiding in an authentic state of agitation, as this reduced ability of sense was always a matter which drowned the Artifinoid in quite the river of displeasure. While this exchange was nearing its end, the exploratory Maria Gabriela Reyes was finally able to locate the room in which Mikolo and Anders were situated. "Mikolo? You around here?" she inquired in a soft and apprehensive tone as she entered the living room. Upon noticing the tense woman's entrance, XXV spoke out again. "I should be going now, brother. We will reconvene at a later time to discuss the matters further," Anders said in a professional tone, shortly after which he started to approach Maria at a swift and determined pace. "Miss Reyes, my name is Anders," he said shortly after making his stop. "I wish I could stay and chat, but pressing matters await me, I am afraid. I hope you can forgive me for such a rude and abrupt introduction." XXV finished his articulation with grand propriety as his name. It's no problem at all, Mr. Anders." The little Reyes responded cordially, while somewhat unsettled, entirely unexpectant of this rather unpredictable meeting. The manner in which the older Artifinoid addressed her contributed to this unresolved state, no matter how minor. Shortly after the woman's remark, XXV nodded at the tiny Maria, who in turn escorted the gifted creation out of the main office with her eyes. With the egress now complete, MGR addressed her newly met, unorthodox acquaintance. "That was your other brother then, Miccolo?" Reyes genuinely inquired, beginning to motion towards the desk at which Miccolo was sitting. "That's him." The oldest one, the OG, Extheide, responded rapidly as he remained seated at his desk with his hands clasped, and only the left side of his face exposed to his little friend. "The one that makes us all feel stupid," the Artifinoid muttered to himself as slight dismay embraced his essence. Despite the tonality of the remark, Maria did not quite hear it. "What do we do now?" she asked playfully. Having now positioned herself on top of the table, Miccolo was occupying with his portrait still dominating her vision. "Say, Reyes, can you hold a secret?" Exe asked Maria shortly after, smirking as he had now turned to face the little one. The little one's response was constructed out of the material of the ever-so-tender grin while platformed on complete silence. The artificial creation trusted Maria fully, for reasons he himself perhaps could not yet truly understand. It was entirely possible that XXV's utmost concerns might have been coming alive as his sibling neared a state of deeper humanization, paralleling his youngest brother Vasik. Of course, there could have been other explanations for this unexpected turn of events, and XXV was hardly one to be so foolish as to negate all potential causes. Despite all of this, however, Maria Reyes effectively became a part of this family overnight, with not a single member claiming an issue with. Just such an unforeseen development. Not even XXV himself. Miccolo and Maria found themselves in motion around the spacious palace yet again as they conquered room by room, much like the night prior. Searching vigilantly for the pair of Artifinoids responsible for the warm welcome Miss Reyes had received earlier on in the day. This adventure had found its culmination as the freshly acquainted lovers' duo stared down the doors of the mansion gymnasium. "There you two are," Extheide announced fervently, immediately after opening the gym doors. "Hey, Lotus." Lucas was the first to respond to the recent inquiry while matching the zeal of his brother. "You are staying with us, then?" The huge man's excitement resembled closely one of a child on Christmas Day, as he was greatly anticipant of the present that was to be her imminent response. "Lotus, huh?" Exe asked, quickly glancing at his new lady friend. "It's because of my dress from before," the tiny one answered with a warm smile. "I kind of like that nickname, actually," Maria added, having begun shifting her gaze from Miccolo to Lucas with the grin still present and still kind. "A beautiful red flower and a beautiful girl," Vi proclaimed, beaming at the woman excitedly as he blanketed her with the mantle of laudation. "Makes sense to me." The big Artifinoid added another egg of praise into the basket. "You are making her blush so much. She is turning as red as that flower right now," Ascaphies stated after quickly scanning the woman, and he was in fact entirely correct. Lotus was wholly overrun by the squadron of admiration commanded by Lucas as she discovered herself losing the battle, blushing immensely while having great difficulty containing a smile. "Anyway, let's do this shit quickly. I got to feed those damn dogs." Miccolo spat out quickly while in the process of lighting yet another cigarette. "I got some bodies. I got some food for them inside my car. Vi, I will need your help getting that food out later." He then concluded, staring at Lucas while Maria just simply chuckled, fully understanding what this food was. "Your dogs kept making rude comments of sexual nature towards me last time I went near them, Miccolo," IX articulated in a voice slightly perturbed yet greatly admonishing. They kept saying they wanted to eat, to eat certain parts of my body. Crossing her arms, the artificial acrobat had quite the trouble of expressing herself with full candour, while the obstacle which provided such friction was named repugnance. You shouldn't blame them for being attracted to you. You should blame yourself for being so attractive. The middle sibling instantaneously responded to his encumbered sister, having left sympathy in the great distance. That doesn't make any damn sense, Miccolo. Lax responded, frustrated, with her arms still crossed and a confused expression on her face beginning to form. I can't control how attractive I look. Well, maybe they can't control how attracted they are to you. Sensibility was never the brazen Artifinoid's strong suit as he stoked the flames deep inside his sister. Expletive you, Mr. Miccolo Greylove. Alexandra stated with fire and vigour, yet no enmity. What? You want more of my expletive? Exii quickly burst out, smiling perversely to himself. You didn't get enough on Nova Street, Miss Alexandra Greylove? The discourteous man then added, clearly and entirely satisfied with himself as he stood on the platform of carnal hunger for his younger sibling, smiling dementedly at her. Oh, you are insufferable, Miccolo, Ix stated with her arms still crossed. Having now shifted her body weight from one side onto the other, while given up the effort of convincing her maniacal brother of the wrongdoing committed by his dogs. I know, it's one of my best qualities. Don't front now, you know you love it. Miccolo said, a sole inhabitant of the vessel that is confidence while out in the ocean that is arrogance. Lotus had made her way towards Lucas, while Alexandra and Miccolo had their little pleasantries, and shortly after the eager pair was finished with the charged exchange, the curious Maria softly spoke to Lucas. I am missing something here, aren't I? Lotus inquired, anticipant. Don't worry, it will all make sense in due time. Vi responded with a stirring smile, unwilling to play spoiler. All right now, let's get this show on the road then, yeah? Zand escalated in the volume of his voice, reaching near shouting levels. Lotus, do you want to see something extraordinary? The Artifinoid's vision was now reserved for the little flower as he pierced her with his enticing gaze. Vi and Ix had both found themselves drenched in the waters of excitement as they vehemently anticipated the opportunity to demonstrate to Lotus their spectacular abilities. Lotus had no difficulty spotting just such excitement engraved across their faces, and so the little one progressed to answer. Sure, terse was while responding, yet just as anticipant and enthusiastic. America's top model, why don't you start? Miccolo spoke, having repositioned himself into the nearest chair inside the gym while waiting for the grand reveal. Lucas obliged and started to head towards the car, which was already inside of the gym. This was an SUV weighing in about 4,400 lbs. V had approached the rear of the vehicle, grabbed it by the axle with just the one hand, and lifted the rear above his head effortlessly. The vehicle was left balancing on the front end. The demonstration was hardly over, however, as Vi then proceeded to grab the bottom of the SUV with his other free hand, and after a certain time spent manoeuvring his body to achieve comfort and stability, the behemoth of a creation lifted the entirety of the car from the ground. Before long, Lucas had overhead pressed the SUV completely while showing no signs of struggle. Eventually, the young Artifinoid did bring the vehicle back down to the ground, of course. After witnessing such an unordinary display of brawn, the look on Lotus's face was one of a complete blank. Though it needs to be said that this was not the case because she wasn't impressed, but rather because the tiny one did not know how to react to what had just recently transpired. An amalgamation of emotions rushed to Lotus. yet not one prevailed over the other, with the product of this psychological conflict producing the state of complete and debilitating bewilderment. The presentation was still not over, however. Next up was the acrobat herself. At the time of the conclusion of Lucas's performance, Lotus was located about 20 meters, 65 feet, away from Alexandra, however, just a few moments later. The two women were just mere meters away from one another, within grabbing distance, in fact. Eix had covered 20 meters, 65 feet, in just a couple of seconds, further adding to the potency of the serum of amazement that the little flower had found herself suddenly injected with. The ceiling of the gymnasium was one of a typical height, reaching about 10 meters, 33 feet, from the floor upwards, with the most typical of steel beams located near the ceiling. With just a few seconds of sprinting, Alexandra Greylove jumped up and clung onto one of the prior-mentioned metallic constructs of support, before swiftly making it on top and glancing down at the flummoxed Reyes, while heartily smiling. The striding gymnast would then quickly make her way back down to the gym floor while retaining the gracefulness of a feline. Nevertheless, still not quite done, as one more demonstration was in order. XVII's turn to shine it now was. This presentation would require a different sort of tool, however, one that the bold Artiphenoid just happened to consistently carry on him. This device was a .45 caliber Sig Sauer P 220 handgun. Well crafted and made to be quite the powerhouse, and this was most certainly the case as Mikolo removed the menacing shooter from the holster and threw it to his sister. "You know the rest, don't you, Xena the warrior princess?" Exed said with the gun removed, yet a heavy dose of quip added while walking away from Iangs to position himself more optimally. "It will be my pleasure," Alexandra murmured, drawing a satisfied smile shortly after. Lotus, having suddenly become a combatant against the forces of deep astonishment, had finally registered a victory in just such a conflict, while ultimately regaining her ability to speak. The little woman turned to Lucas and sincerely said, "What's about to happen, Lucas?" Maria asked, anxiety commanding her. "You will see." Vi's response was eager indeed. "I love this one," he added, smiling. "You ready?" Exeunt had now once again joined the discourse, with the appropriate distance now covered and all ready. "Sure am." Ix's response time to her brother's inquiry rivaled her abilities. "I am going to enjoy this more than I should, brother," she murmured once more, with contentment yet again being the ever-so-present. The graceful Ings then pointed the gun at her sibling's head, requiring very little time to set the aim up precisely, and once this act was complete, the beautiful acrobat pulled the trigger at a distance of only 3 meters, 10 feet or so. Loud and deafening sound imbued the room once the bullet was unleashed from the .45 caliber beast, which resulted in Tsai's dropping down on the ground, blanketed by unconsciousness, as per common with these types of interactions. Up until this point, fear was not part of Maria's recipe, yet it had rapidly become just that once the lady witnessed the unprecedented. Having the ability to contain herself no longer, the woman screamed, gasping her hands while staring at Mikolo's motionless body. However, this product of heavy confusion and deep terror was quickly supplanted by even more befuddlement once Lotus observed what the rest of the occupants of the gym had become quite accustomed to by this point. XVII, after just mere seconds of being blasted in the head with a .45, was now in the process of rising back up to his feet, and a few moments after that, Mikolo was standing upright yet again as if no shots were ever fired in the first place. "You okay, Mikolo?" Yix inquired with genuine concern as her exasperation with her brother left her soul alongside that bullet which had left the gun. "I feel better than your fine-ass looks, girl," Exthai answered confidently while lighting yet another cigarette. His third one for those who haven't been keeping count. Alexandra, choosing to overlook the most recent remark made by her aberrant sibling, turned to Lotus and genuinely inquired, "So, what you think, Lotus?" Maria Gabriela Reyes did in fact require some time to process what had just recently evinced in front of her eyes before finally producing a response. After quickly glancing at all three artificial creations in her presence, the tiny flower exclaimed, "What in the fuck are you?" Chapter 7. 3. Red Lotus, Maria Lotus Reyes. Artificially created? The perplexed little Lotus inquired of the three artiphenoids, having found herself inside of a cloud of amazement. "So, like cyborgs or something?" she asked yet again in effort to make her descent down from the aforementioned back to the land of lucidity. "Not at all, Maria." Yix had taken over the effort of explanation due to absence of her oldest brother XXV. "We are not cybernetic at all. We are flesh and blood, but much improved." She expounded to the young Maria while sitting on top of a desk inside the main office room of the mansion, with Maria occupying a chair directly across from the female artiphenoid. Exthaion was found at his desk, while Thesis was standing behind Lotus, leaning against a wall as he listened to the conversation taking place. We were all engineered inside of an incubator to fit certain specificities and biological parameters in order to accomplish material stability, but the material is organic and not mechanical. Ix concluded her explanation with a smile of satisfaction, having revealed to Lotus the truth. "But you are not humans, though?" Lotus required more inquiries in order to escape the island of confusion her aircraft of understanding had crashed onto. "Not at all." Alexandra once again was the first to answer, with pride. "We even have a mixture of animal DNA inside all four of us," Sakes stated while briefly glancing at her two brothers. "That DNA was used to guarantee genetic stability and provides us with much of our abilities." Miss Greylove finished yet another exposition with her arms crossed and her voice flowing with torrents of eagerness. "Does that make sense, sweetie?" Mother Nyx had inquired of her female counterpart. "Honestly?" Lotus took a moment to gaze over at the two artiphenoids in front of her, XVI and IX to be more precise, before continuing. "It doesn't, but it also doesn't have to make sense to me for me to understand that what I saw from all of you is far beyond human." A small grin had formed across the face of the young woman as she paused her remark. "An explanation of some sorts is still better than no explanation, even if I don't understand it." The smile increased in scope once the little flower was finished. "That will have to do then."
Sven had forced his way into the conversation, having become bored by his sister's presentation.
"Get ready, Lotus," he stated as he began rising to his feet. "We are going to be leaving soon. We got work to do." Mikolo added while removing multiple packs of fags from the desk drawer and into his pocket for the trip ahead. Yix and V opted to stay silent and egress the confines of the office, understanding fully well what their brother had in his mind. "Where are we going?" Lotus asked with no oscillation in her voice. "You know the cartel well, right?" Xp asked, having begun looking across the desk at the new arrival. "More than I would like to know them, yeah." Lotus responded in somber tone with painful memories deep inside. "You know some of the locations they operate from?" Mikolo continued the barrage of inquisition. "I do, but only the smaller fish. Nobody really important." Maria answered with truth and swiftness. "You going to show me where those locations are?" and had now begun the process of moving towards the door of the